Hello, everyone.
How you doing? How are you?
Good, good. Baruch Hashem.
Yeah, I wasn't available the last few times. I was traveling a lot.
Good. Nice. Everything's on YouTube. You can watch it.
Yeah, that's right.
So today is actually going to be the last class that we're going to do on this topic of positivity bias.
The last class on Sunday or last class altogether? On
For the Sunday class, we're going to have a positivity bias.
Okay, good, because I'm going to be going to Georgia soon.
Well, they have Zoom in Georgia, no?
That's right.
Okay.
I have to thank you again. That the Yoshino was very beautiful, and your gift was outstanding.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it.
And those cupcakes were.
I'll tell my wife.
That your wife did that?
Yeah.
Wow, bless her.
Yeah, very talented, gifted lady. I married.
It's super duper treat.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it was too much. It was too much. Marilyn said it wasn't too much for her. She would eat mine too.
Right. Very good. Okay, so we're going to start off with this fascinating story, which takes us back. Let me pull up a picture here, actually.
Thank you.
Let me pull up a picture of this doctor. Let me see if I can find this doctor. Okay, we'll skip the picture. We'll just have to use the names. Okay, so today's class is titled Oy or Joy. And this is, in this lesson, we're going to focus on the Rebbe's attention to being joyful, even during periods where others might have seen it as a sad time. So here's the case. So in 1977, the Chabad movement, Lubavitch Hasidic followers of the Rebbe, were anxiously praying for the recovery of the Rebbe. He suffered a massive heart attack on Shmini Atzeres during the dancing of the Torah, and the doctors weren't even sure he would pull through. They flew in. None of the doctors wanted to deal with the Rebbe. Why? Because the Rebbe insisted he wants to remain in his office to be treated. They turned his office into a mini hospital. And many doctors weren't ready to take the risk. They said they have the best equipment in the hospital. They don't want to treat him. And the Rebbe felt that the office where he worked in was blessed by the previous Rebbe. He didn't want to leave the office. So they flew in a top cardiologist from Chicago named Dr. Ira Weiss. And he took care of the Rebbe. And after 38 days, the Rebbe returned to full public life. So this is a quote he shares. He says, "The Rebbe had a heart attack that involved such extensive damage that in anyone's normal medical experience, one would worry about the possibility of survival. One would almost discount any possibility of subsequent functionality at the level of the Rebbe. In other words, it was doubtful whether the Rebbe would make it through. And even if he would make it through, he would definitely have to decrease his level of function as a public leader. And yet we know that the Rebbe actually expanded his activities afterwards. There was a call and movement for the Rebbe to take a short vacation, go to the Hamptons, for a few weeks to recover. And the Rebbe dismissed it. He's like, hold on, every day I get thousands of letters that I respond to. If I go on take holiday for 3 weeks, I'm going to have triple amount of work when I come back. So no thanks. I'd rather stay here. And this is while the Rebbe was on machines and being monitored. And, so the way it started was, this is as reported in the Yediot Achrona paper in October 9th, 1977, that it started at 10:30 p.m. The celebrations were stopped in the middle of the dancing when the Rebbe had an attack of severe pain in the chest area. The jam-packed synagogue quickly emptied, and some congregants broke windows to let in fresh air. When the synagogue was half empty, the Rebbe requested that they bring him a Torah. To the shock of all those in attendance, the Rebbe began to dance with the Torah. Through it all, and even after the Rebbe went to his office to rest, he refused to be taken to the hospital. He was very thirsty, but he wouldn't drink water until he made Kiddush. So he went into the sukkah to make a Kiddush on wine. They gave him grape juice. He said, no, I always made on wine. And the Rabbi Klein said, we did not know much at the time. Rabbi Klein was the secretary of the Rebbe. But what we did know was that half of the Rebbe's heart was not functioning. So this is what one of the doctors shared, a doctor that came in to respond immediately. He said, when the Rebbe first had the heart attack, I reported to him that some of the Hasidim were still singing and dancing. So you can imagine the Rebbe has a heart attack, and there are Hasidim that are singing and dancing because of Simchas Torah. So what do you think the Rebbe's reaction to this was? Anyone want to share? The Rebbe just had a heart attack, and the Hasidim are dancing and singing because it's Simchas Torah.
It's important to stay positive. It's important to stay positive, not to get negative, because negativity will only bring things down, and positivity will bring everything up.
Yeah. So the Rebbe said that was exactly the Rebbe's way. He looked directly at me, and the doctor used the term, the Hasidim are doing Shira V'Zimra, song and joy and dance. So the Rebbe smiled. The Rebbe was very happy. And so from then on, this doctor found a way to treat the Rebbe. Whenever he would go into him every 2 days, he would always report, and the Hasidim are having Shira V'Zimra. And that would make the Rebbe's eyes light up. And that was like a kind of medicine for the Rebbe. But the story doesn't end there. Many years later, it was Simchas Torah again. The 770 was packed. This doctor came into 770 to participate in like the anniversary. It was a few years later after that heart attack. And 770 Simchas Torah, it was jam-packed. So it was literally like a washing machine in there. You would go in and you'd get pushed around and you'd end up in different places. If you would jump up in the air, you wouldn't land because everyone was so packed together like sardines. So you jump up and then you were stuck in midair. And they'd have the air conditioning on full blast, and it would be on the bottom would be boiling hot. Everyone's schwitzing and sweating, buckets of sweat on the floor, and on top it's nice and cool. So he shares that what happened to him was the Rebbe, they would make a space in the middle of the shul for the Rebbe, and they gave this doctor a Torah. It was a heavy Torah, and the doctor was following the Rebbe into the middle of the circle. But somehow the crowd captured him, and he got stuck in place, and he couldn't continue to follow the Rebbe into the middle of the circle. And so the Rebbe was dancing, and the Hasidim were dancing, and he was getting elbowed and knocked, and the Torah was heavy, and his glasses was getting crooked, and he was like at a loss in the whole hakafa. Afterwards, his hat was smashed, and afterwards, finally the Rebbe turns to him. In other words, he approached the Rebbe, and the Rebbe looked at him. He's like, how do you like my medicine? Shira V'Zimra. Shira V'Zimra, the Rebbe told him many years later. Joy and singing. But still it doesn't end. In 1992, the Rebbe suffered a stroke. And once again, Dr. Feldman was called upon to tend to the Rebbe. And this time again, the secretaries were there as well. I walked over to the Rebbe. He looked up at me directly and he said, Shira V'Zimra. And he encouraged me that even though while he was personally suffering a terrible anguish and pain, that he should encourage the people to be joyful at the same time. So the question is, why? why did the Rebbe insist on joy when it seems that the moment isn't called for? In other words, the moment, there's King Solomon says, there's a time for sadness and a time for happiness. A time for, there's a time and place for everything. And yet it seems that the Rebbe somehow figured out a way to insert joy into misplaced moments. So, where does this come from? Before Hasidim were called Hasidim, do you know what their original name was? They were called the Freilichers, the happy ones. Because Hasidim were always happy, even when they were dead broke and suffered much hardship. They always found reasons to be happy. So what's the system? What's the philosophy behind it? The philosophy is, in other words, let me explain why that's so innovative. We know that the Torah says in a few places that you have to serve God with joy. So whenever you do a mitzvah, you should do it joyfully. Because when you're serving the king, if you do it as a burden, it's like a spouse doing a favor for the other spouse, but does it with a frown. What kind of, that's not a way to do it. If you're bringing your wife flowers, you do it with smile and joy. If you're sweet, if you're cleaning, if you're helping your wife clean the house, you do it with smile and joy. It adds, that's service. So the Torah always pushes you should serve God with joy. But the founder of the Hasidic movement, Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, I forgot to put this on YouTube. Let me add this to YouTube. Sorry. I apologize.
It says you're on the YouTube.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just muting it over here. Okay. Perfect. Okay. So, in other words, even though the Torah says that you should serve God with joy, for many years, Jewish communities actually had a very serious and sad disposition. Why? Because we're Jews in exile. We don't have our holy temple. We don't have, we're persecuted. So for a long time, the emphasis has been on the Jewish people as victims. And therefore, we try to stay focused on Torah and mitzvahs, and we kind of sucked out the joy of life. And the only time you were allowed to be joyous when you did a mitzvah. If you weren't doing a mitzvah, you weren't allowed to be happy. Now, that wasn't something that the rabbi said, but it was just, that's how just life came to be lived. And Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov came to fight against that. And he said, when you're serving God, it's not something you're only doing when you're doing a mitzvah. Service of God is 24 hours, 7 days a week. When you're sleeping, it's in service of God because you're sleeping in order to give you energy to serve God better. When you're eating, it's in service of God. When you're doing business, it's in service of God. So everything you're doing is in service of God. So you always have to be joyful because the Torah tells us you have to serve God with joy. So that's number one. You always have to be, you're always serving, and therefore you always have to be joyful. Additionally, the Zohar says that when we're joyful down here, the higher realms mirror us. In other words, it works in both directions. What happens above impacts the world below. So therefore, if there's a special energy on Passover, it affects us even if we don't realize it. Even if we're not aware that it's Passover, there's special energies above that say it's Passover tonight, and that affects us. But the same thing happens in reverse. When we are happy, it causes a happy response above. And therefore, when people are happy, they're more generous. And so the heavenly realms are more generous with their blessings. So that's why it wasn't just the Rebbe was saying, don't be sad, be happy, because why be sad? What's the use? The Rebbe was saying, if you'll be happy and you'll be joyful, you'll actually bring me healing. Because when people are happy and joyful, God mirrors that response and gives us a generous response below. So just to illustrate to what degree the Hasidic Rebbes took this concept of us being happy to elicit divine blessing, so I'll share two stories. One story is a story of a Hasidic rabbi named Reb Simcha Banim of Pishischa. He was crossing a bridge, and he noticed that in a distance there was a Jew who tried crossing the bridge at a different area and was drowning. He was being pulled away by a strong tide, and he was grasping at anything, but it didn't look like he was going to survive. And Reb Simcha Banim realized he wasn't going to be able to make it in time to save the person's life. So he yelled out, "Send regards to the Leviathan." Leviathan is the big fish that God created, a massive fish, a mammoth, that lives at the depth of the sea. So he said, "Send regards to the Leviathan." So the Chassid was so shocked by, how misplaced the Rebbe's comment was to what he was drowning, that he just broke out in laughter. And suddenly a branch broke off, a log came, and he grabbed onto the log and he survived. So he asked the Rebbe, how could you say something so insensitive? Why don't you tell me Shema Yisrael, repent? Instead, you told me send regards to Leviathan. So he said, so the Rebbe responded, because we have the term Simcha Poretz Geder. Joy breaks through all barriers and boundaries. Sometimes there's a constriction in divine blessing, but when you're joyful, it breaks through all these constrictions. So I try to elicit joy in you, that way God would help you. And a similar story is the second Chabad Rebbe. He used to have, it may sound strange to us, but he had a choir and these horse riders that would do shows and entertain the Hasidic court. And it was saved for special celebrations, for a Lag BaOmer, for special occasions. They would bring out the Hasidic choir and the Hasidic horse riders. And this Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, his name was Reb Dov Ber Shneori. His son was one of the horse riders. And out of the blue, the Mittler Rebbe says, "I want the choir and the horse riders to do a show." And so they started doing their show. And suddenly a great tragedy struck, that the Mittler Rebbe's son flew off of the horse, and the horses trampled on him, and it looked really bad. And they ran to the Mittler Rebbe, and the Mittler Rebbe said they should continue. They should continue doing their show. And everyone was like shocked. Here, his son is like almost dying, and they say they continue. So they continued the show. And then when they started treating the Rebbe's son, they realized it wasn't as bad as it looked. All it was is he broke a leg, but nothing more severe than that. And he explained that he saw that there was going to be a divine harsh decree against his son that day. And to try to minimize the decree, he tried to bring some joy to everyone on that day. And that's why he called for the choir and for the acrobats. And we see that all that happened to my son is that he broke a leg and nothing more than that. So that's the concept over here. Of bringing joy is a tool to bring healing and blessing to a person's life. And not just when we're doing a mitzvah, but even when we're driving in our car, we should be singing happy tunes. When we're talking to others, we should try to find opportunities to bring joy to others and joy to ourselves. And that brings blessing to our life. So this is probably like a final concept that locks in the Rebbe's positivity bias. That it wasn't just he saw redeeming qualities in other people, but he always found excuses to bring joy because of the great blessings that it receives. Here's another story. Same idea, but there was a chassid who was extremely negative and pessimistic about the future. And the Rebbe stood up and took a volume of the Zohar off his shelf, opened it up to the part of the Zohar that says the statement, Tachazi, come and observe. Our world is always ready to receive the spiritual flow that emanates from above. The upper world provides in accordance with the state below. If the state below is joyous, correspondingly, abundance flows from above. However, if the state below is one of sadness, then correspondingly, the flow of blessing is constricted. Therefore, the Rebbe turned to the Chassid, serve God with joy, because a human joy and optimism draw a corresponding joy from above. And as we explained last week, or 2 weeks ago, it was last week. As I explained last week, psychologists might disagree with this. Psychologists might argue that you're actually setting yourself up for disappointment because your optimism might not pan out, and then you'll be disappointed that it didn't work out. Better to be pessimistic, and then you'll be pleasantly surprised when things work out. But from the Hasidic point of view, being optimistic is not just a frame of reality, it's actually a tool that manipulates reality. If you are happy, you cause blessing. So it's not just be optimistic that it will work out, it's your optimism actually ensures that it will work out. By you putting trust in God, actually ensures that it works out. By you being joyful, actually allows for greater blessing. Okay, so that's it for this short 5-part series on positivity bias and joy and happiness. And there's no question that when we are happy, we are physically healthier, we are happier people, are wealthier people, have better marriages, have better relationships. So we always have to find opportunities not to run after happiness, things that we think will give us happiness, like the next vacation, the next car, but to try to find inner joy, to be optimistic and be joyful, and that will bring blessing to us all. Shavua
Thank
tov.
you very much.
Have a wonderful week.
Thank you, Rabbi. Take care.
Be well.
Very good. Very good. Whole idea is to stay connected with Hashem. If you just keep him in mind, no matter what you're doing.
Exactly.
That's such a plus.
Yeah.
It's not easy, but
not easy.
Something to work on.
But it's simple. The idea is simple, but then you have to put in the work.
Very simple, very simple. Take care. Thank you.
Be well.
You too.